Hi, this is John. I just thought I'd do a little video talking about my VCVRack patch that I recently created a jam with, which is using my external semi-modular synthesizers and drum machine along with a synth within VCVRack, and probably from a interface point of view, the most interesting thing is that I'm using DC coupled outputs from my audio interface into the synthesizer. So let's get into it. Here's the patch overall. I have a master clock sending elements at different rates to different things which we'll come on to. I have a chord sequence 145 in C major with some variations, and that's feeding an ARP which is going to my Crave synthesizer, which is down here, and also the you'll see the bass note from the chord sequence is going to the Interzone module, where I've got a bass note coming out. So that's going into input 3 of my mixer. Turn the LFO down on the bass note. We'll listen to that first. Let's start the clock running. See, that's starting the chord sequence. That's looping through. And if we just turn the volume up on the bass, as we introduce the LFO, which is synced to the clock, you hear the effect come in. Nice distorted bass line. So we'll lose that for a moment. The next thing to talk about are the drums. Topograph module here, which is a drum sequencer with 3 channels: kick or bass, snare and hi-hat, and you can change the pattern of it by changing the X and Y values. So I'll show you what we're doing in a bit. I'll just put a mute or a mult or something. Let's do duplicate that. X. I'll just put those over there so I can introduce them later on. So this is going out to C2, D2 and F sharp, which are the notes, if we go over this way, on my drum machine. Lisa's XR16. The outputs from that are going into my mixer here in the first 4 channels. So the first 3 channels for because the 4th one isn't being used, from the 3-channel drum sequencer, and the output of that is going into my audio interface and back into my Mac. So if we start, if we turn up the kick, okay, you can see that on there. So let's add the snare. Okay, there we go. And you can see, I did a fill. Right, so what's going on here is I've got a clock divider, and every 8th note or 8th clock division, it adjusts the pattern for the snare and the hi-hat, effectively doing a fill. And you can see that on the scope down here. Here it comes again. So let's also bring in modulation of the X and Y. That was X and Y. And then every every fourth beat, so every other one is doing a variation of the pattern. So every 8 it's a variation and a fill, every 4 it's a variation. And I can use the mixer to take the drums in and out. So that's pretty cool. Okay, let's have a look at the DC coupled interfaces out of VCVRack. So here we have 2 LFOs. I have a square wave, which is currently 4 times the clock speed. Let me slow that one down so you can see that on the scope. And we have a triangle wave, or saw wave, scaled slightly as well, shown in yellow on here. Now these are routed to my M2 interface, outputs 1 and 2, and you can see the voltage. So as a default, the LFOs, you can see it goes between plus and minus 5 on here. Now, and the audio interface translates that to about plus or minus 1.75 volts. So I've applied a doubling scaling of that, so you can see the output is plus or minus 10, and the saw goes from around 0 up to about 9 or so. So those go into the 1 and 2. Now if we go over to the audio interface, which is under here, at the back, if I lift up my mixer, you can see the 2 black cables there coming out of the back, which are the floating ring cables. And on the front display, you can see the number 1, which is the square wave, and number 2, which is the saw, and that's showing the 2 different voltages changing over time. So if I increase the rate of the LFO on VCVRack, you'll see that one on the left gets faster, and again I'll slow it down, it changes there. So where's that going? It's coming out of the back of the audio interface, and I'm putting that into the multiple input of my Crave synthesizer, so I can take 2 copies of it out of there. So a handy mult module built into the Crave. So the first one I'm using to modulate the cutoff on the Crave. So let me set the LFO back to 4 times the clock speed. You'll see on the scope that's changed. The clock is running. If we increase the volume on the Crave, we'll start to hear the sequence. This is with the volume of the M2 turned down, so there's no voltage going into the cutoff modulation. So the cutoff is just the level set on the knob here. So as I increase this volume control, that's increasing the voltage going into the cutoff modulation, so it's attenuating the LFO square wave. You'll see that start to have an effect, or you'll hear that start to have an effect. If you turn the cutoff right down, effectively you hear it only 50% of the time, because the bass notes are removed straight out. So if I reduce the volume on the M2 again, I have to increase the cutoff on here, and then you'll hear it revert back to where it was before. Okay, that's the crave. Now the second output from the malt on there is going over to the trigger on my edge. So if I turn this up, you see, if I remove the other one, actually let me remove that. If I take out the velocity patch for a moment, as I increase this, nothing's happening immediately. That's because I've lowered the voltage, and for a trigger it needs to reach a cutoff. So it's only going to come to fire when it's over about 3 volts. So I need to increase the volume on here, and it will reach a point where the edge will start to trigger. There we go. And that's triggering the currently selected step, which is step 1 on the sequencer. I can change the pitch. And the delay, etc. There we go, so that's the edge. Again, if I lower the volume slightly, it will go below the trigger threshold. If I lower the voltage, increase again. So now, if we add in the second output from the audio interface into the velocity, that's the saw wave, and you'll hear it basically modulating the velocity, so you only hear it at near the top here, so you get a repetitive pattern with the edge. So that's combining the trigger and then modulating the velocity when it is triggered. Again, if I reduce the volume on the MOTU, you don't hear it at all because the trigger isn't firing. Bring that back in, and then add in the crave again. Add back in my drums. Add back in my bass line. Okay. Let's lose the crave, lose the hi-hat, lose the snare, lose the kick, lose the bass line, and we're left with the edge. Reduce the voltage, the edge trigger stops, and all done. Thank you. Hope that was interesting. See you at the next one.